or 19x6. 6. It follows that since there are 19 chapters between the missing basmala and the extra one, that the sum of those chapter numbers is a multiple of 19. The sum of any 19 consecutive numbers is a multiple of 19. But the total, 342, is also the exact number of words between the two occurrences of the basmala in chapter 27. This number, 342, is 19x18. 7. Each word in the basmala occurs in the Quran a number of times that is a multiple of 19. The first word Ism name occurs 19 times. The second word Allah God occurs 2698 times or 19x142. The third word Al-Rahman Most Gracious occurs 57 times or 19x3. The fourth word Al-Rahim Most Merciful occurs 114 times or 19x6. Appendix 189-8. The first revelation that came to the Prophet Muhammad was 19 words. And the total number of letters in the 19 words of the first revelation is 76, 19x4. 9. Although they were first in order of revelation, these verses are placed at the beginning of chapter 96 in the final order God indicated the Quran should be written. This chapter is atop the last 19 chapters. Note: in his Appendix 28 drive, Khalifa clarifies the fact that the order of the finalized Quran is different from the order in which it was revealed. Ibid. p. 698. When the Prophet died, he left the complete Quran written down with his own hand in the chronological order of revelation, along with specific instructions as to where to place every verse. The divine instructions recorded by the Prophet were designed to put the Quran together into the final format intended for God's final testament to the world. 75. 17. 10. Chapter 96 consists of 304 Arabic letters, or 19x16. And those 304 letters make up 19 verses. 11. The last chapter revealed chapter 110 has 19 words, and its first verse is 19 letters. 12. As mentioned above, the word Allah God occurs 2698 times 19x142. If you add the numbers of the verses where this word occurs, the total is 118,123 or 19x6217. 13. The word Quran, in all of its grammatical forms, occurs in 38 different chapters. 38 is 19x2. When you exclude any occurrences where it refers to a Quran other than the actual Quran which we have, for example, one excluded verse refers to a hypothetical non-Arabic Quran, and add the chapter and verse numbers for those occurrences, the total is 4,408, or 19x232. 190. Development of the Christian doctrine. 14. The total number of times the Quran is mentioned is 58 times, but one of them refers to a Quran other than this which the disbelievers demanded. So the correct number of references to the actual book, the Quran, is 57 or 19x3. 15. Within the 114 chapters of the Quran, 29 of them are prefixed with certain letters of the Arabic alphabet, or Quranic initials. Intermixed between the first initial chapter, chapter 2, and the last initial chapter, chapter 68, there are 38 non-initial chapters, or 19x2. 16. In this same group of chapters, from chapter 2 through chapter 68, there are 19 alternating sets of initialed and non-initial chapters. 17. The total number of verses between and including the first initial in this group 2, 1 and the last initial 68, 1 is 5,263, 19x277. 18. Within this group of chapters there are also 2,641 occurrences of the word Allah, or 19x139. Of course, that leaves 57, or 19x4, occurrences of that word outside of this group. 19. If you add the chapter and verse numbers of the 57 occurrences of Allah outside the initial section, the total is 2432 or 19x128. Quranic initials. When Dr. Khalifa Ibad, page 612, was beginning to work on his translation of the Quran, he tells us, "I vowed to God that I would not move from one verse to the next unless I fully understood it." He quickly came up short, for the first verse of the second chapter begins with a set of what are known as the Quranic initials. As mentioned in fact number 15 above, these appendix 191 initials are simply sets of Arabic letters, 14 sets altogether that occur as verses or at the beginning of verses for 29 different chapters of the Quran. It was his search for an explanation of these Quranic initials, which included a computer analysis, that led to the discovery of the code embedded in the Arabic text of the Quran. These initials exhibit many aspects of the code, when looked at as individual sets and when looked at all together. The remainder of this appendix deals with those initials, which can get fairly complex. Please feel free to read only as much about them as you wish. You will find a link at the end of the appendix to take you to more information if you are interested. Let us begin by looking at the initial sets which use a single letter. The first one we will examine is the initial which has the English transliteration of Q. The initial Q. QAAF. There are several special phenomena having to do with the initial Q. Perhaps it can be seen as standing for Quran. This is especially so since there are two Q initial chapters, each with 57 19x3 Qs in them. Thus the total of Qs in both chapters is 114 19x6, the same number as the number of chapters in the Quran. The fact that both Q initial chapters contain exactly 57 Qs is quite remarkable, because the first of them, chapter 42, is more than twice as long as the second, chapter 50. There is another remarkable phenomenon in the sum of the number of each chapter with the number of verses in that chapter. Chapter 42 has 53 verses. 42 plus 53 is 95, 19x5. If we look at the other Q initial chapter, 50, it has 45 verses. 50 plus 45 is also 95. 192. Development of the Christian doctrine drive. Khalifa's idea that Q might stand for the Quran is strengthened by discoveries made after his death. Submit Ter's perspective, Masjid Tucson, December, 1990. When you look at the chapters between and inclusive of those Q initial chapters, chapters 42 and 53, there are some interesting facts. First of all, the total number of Qs occurring in that group of chapters is 456, or 19x24. Also, if you add the total number of verses in these 9 chapters, you have 403. This number added to the sum of the chapter numbers, 414, is 817, or 19x43. Then, if you look at the geometrical value of the initials in the initial verses for those chapters, the total is 570, or 19x30. Note: an explanation of geometrical values is at the end of this appendix under the subtitle Y19. Finally, let us examine the chapter numbers and verse numbers for the 6 occurrences of the word Quran in those chapters: 42, 7, 43, 3 and 31, 46, 29, 47, 24 and 50. 1. When you add just the chapter numbers, 42 plus 43 plus 46 plus 47 plus 50, the total is 228, or 19x12. Likewise, when you add the verse numbers, 7 plus 3 plus 31 plus 29 plus 24 plus 1, the total is 95, or 19x5. The initial in Nun. This initial prefixes only one chapter, number 68. Chapter 68 is the last initial chapter. In the case of this one initial only, the letter's name is spelled out in the Arabic. Nun. Wow Nun. The total number of occurrences of N in this chapter, including the 2 occurrences in the initial's name, is 133, or 19x7. The initial, S, Sard S prefixes 3 different chapters, 7, 19 and 38. The total occurrences of S in these 3 chapters taken together is 152, or 19x8. Appendix 193. At this point it should probably be mentioned that Dr. Khalifa could not ignore the implications of the mathematical coding of critical phrases in the Quran that clearly point to the rejection of teachings not based directly on the Quran as sources of religious guidance. The fury of traditional Muslim clergy at his conclusions and his straightforward statement of them eventually led to his assassination. It is to be expected then that those same clergy have attacked the discoveries. Most of those attacks have been focused on the Quranic initials, and one of their major arguments is with the Sard. This is because in modern copies of the Quran the Arabic word bastatan in chapter 7, verse 69 is written with a Sard rather than the letter Sin. This would increase the count of Sard by 1, and it would no longer be divisible by 19. But the oldest available copy of the Quran, the Tashkent copy, writes bastatan with a Sin. Dr. Khalifa includes a reproduction from that Tashkent copy in his translation Ibid, p. 614. In most cases, the initials occur together in sets. Next, we will examine some of these sets. The initials, YS. Yasin. These 2 initials are found at the beginning of chapter 36. The number of times that these 2 letters appear in this chapter is 285, or 19x15. The Quran uses 2 different forms of Y, one of which is very subtle for non-Arabic readers to distinguish. Amazingly, chapter 36 does not have any subtle forms of Y, even though it is quite a long chapter. Dr. Khalifa's book Quran, Visual Presentation of the Miracle, Islamic Productions, 1982, shows every Y and S marked in the Arabic text of chapter 36. 194. Development of the Christian doctrine. The initials, HM. HaMeem. This set of initials is found initializing the 7 consecutive chapters 40 through 46. The total occurrence of these 2 in all of these chapters is 2147, or 19x113. The initials, or SQ. Ein Sin Qaf. Chapter 42 is the only chapter with a set of initials HM in the first verse and another or SQ in verse 2. Of course, the H's and M's figure in the counts for HM as mentioned above. The number of times the letters of the second set of initials, or SQ in chapter 42 is 209, or 19x11. The initials, ALM. Aleph Laam Mim. The most common letter in Arabic is A, L is the second most common, and M is the third most common. This combination of initials prefix 6 chapters, 2, 3, 29, 30, 31 and 32. Dr. Khalifa reports that in every one of those 6 chapters, the total occurrence of A's plus L's and M's is divisible by 19. Of course, this means that when looking at all 6 chapters together, the grand total of all these initials is divisible by 19. Ibid, pp. 615 to 616. The initials, ALR. Aleph Laam Ra. These initials prefix chapters 10, 11, 12, 14 and 15. Again, in each of those chapters the total number of A's plus L's plus R's is divisible by 19. Initials, ALMR, Aleph Laam Mim Ra. This group of initials prefix only chapter 13. Their total combined frequency in that chapter is 1482, or 19x78. Appendix 195. Initials, ALMS. Aleph Laam Mim Sa. Chapter 7 is the only chapter prefixed by this combination of initials. The total occurrence of these combined letters in this chapter is 5320, or 19x280. Note that the initial SAD also interacts with the SADs of chapters 19 and 38 to produce a total of SADs which is divisible by 19. See the discussion of the initial SAD above. Initials, KHY or S, KAAF HA, ein SAD. This longest set of initials begins chapter 19. The joint total of these initials in that chapter is 798, or 19x42. Initials, H, Ha, TH, Tar Ha, TS, Tar Sin, and TSM. Tar Sin Mim. These remaining four groups of initials interact in an interlocking and overlapping relationship which produces a combined total of 1767, which is 19x93. Mathematical properties of the initialed SURAS as a whole half of the Arabic alphabet, or 14 letters, are combined in various different ways to make up 14 different sets of initials. These 14 sets initialize 29 different chapters. If you take the geometrical values of each of the 14 different letters occurring as initials and sum them, you get 693. Add to that 29 for the number of chapters and you get 722, or 19x19x2. Also, if you add the geometrical values of each initial 693 again to the chapter numbers where each first occurs, totaling 196. Development of the Christian doctrine to 295, you get 988, or 19x52. For example, Aleph has the geometrical value of 1 and first occurs in chapter 2. Ha has the geometrical value of 5 and it first occurs in chapter 19, etc. Those numbers for all 14 initials give you the total of 988. You will find more of these relationships in Rashad Khalifa's Appendix 1, along with tables illustrating them. There is one more which is so remarkable that it must be included. For each initial chapter, take the chapter number, add the number of Quranic initials which prefix it, and then add the number of verses containing initials. This number will be 1 for all chapters except 42, which has initials in 2 verses. As an example, the first initial chapter is chapter 2. It has 3 Quranic initials which occur in 1 verse. When we add 2 plus 3 plus 1, we get 6. Let us call this total the chapter total. When you sum all the chapter totals for the initial chapters, you get 931, or 19x49. This in itself is amazing enough, but there is more. If you multiply the chapter number by the number of initials instead of adding them, and then add the number of verses containing initials, you still get a grand total which is a multiple of 19. 2052, or 19x108. You can illustrate for yourself how remarkable this is by trying to duplicate it. You will see that this definitely is not a mathematical property, and clearly indicates divine arrange. Meant. Why 19? The main message in the Quran is that there is only one God. The number of times that the word word one is used to refer to this concept of one God is 19. At the time of the revelation of the Quran, letters were used as numbers, in the same way that the Romans used their letters, now known as Roman numerals. The importance of the concept of one God is underscored by the fact that if you take Appendix 197, the numerical values assigned to the letters of word, W equals 6, A equals 1, H equals 8, D equals 4, the total is 19. These values are known as the geometrical value of the letters. It is very interesting that the geometrical value for the Hebrew word one or ved is also 19. Dr. Khalifa sums it up with the following: Ibid, p. 625, the number 19, therefore, proclaims the first commandment in all the scriptures, that there is only one God. The comprehensiveness and intricacy of this code is a reassurance that not only is the Quran a divine revelation, but unlike the Bible, it comes to us without alteration. As I shared at the beginning of this appendix, it acts as a tamper-proof seal. Parameters of this Quranic mathematical code continue to be discovered by students of the Quran. If you are interested in seeing more of this code, you will find many articles at the following link: http://www.masjidison.org Quran Miracle Index, HTML 198. Development of the Christian Doctrine Chapter 1 Communication Issues. Role of the Scripture Writers and Translators. At first, Christians gave little thought to their own history. The Lord would return soon, they believed, and put an end to all his Tory. When men give up the jobs, gaze into the heavens, and look for the end of the world, they write no history. Why record the past if there will be no one to remember it? Robert Wilken, The Myth of Christian Beginnings, Doubleday, 1971, p. 27. Every human being is blessed with the freedom to understand and worship God as they understand God. As mentioned in the introduction, this is a God-given right that must be defended absolutely. Today we have been blessed with many resources to allow us to help research and study our religious understandings, to strengthen those understandings or to grow and develop them and to find our own truths. Mention is also made in the introduction of the difficulties in defining Christian doctrine. While there is enormous variability among Christians, all take their understanding from the Bible as their starting point. However, research makes it apparent that the early followers of Jesus did not immediately see the need to document his teachings. What we find recorded in the New Testament was written down many years after the crucifixion. Many, initially including myself, think of the early Christians as pious men who knew that they were helping to form and spread a religion that would become the great force that it is today. I assume that the disciples Matthew, Mark, Luke and John wrote the Gospels as tools to be used in the early 1-2. Development of the Christian doctrine spread of that religion. It therefore came as a surprise that the first writings to circulate among early Christians were Paul's letters. In fact, much of what we recognize today as the basic teachings of Christianity came to us through Paul, originally known as Saul of Tarsus. Though he never met Jesus, he was the major missionary to the Gentiles in the immediate years following the crucifixion. His letters were written to various different congregations, often trying to solve localized problems, or to consolidate the faithful into one cohesive congregation, rather than to document and spread the actual teachings of Jesus. For the early Christians, the kingdom of God was very close at hand. They expected it at any time. These expectations undoubtedly changed the nature of the communication of Jesus's teachings. Any study of Christian doctrines must deal with the issues involved in that communication. It was only through the passing on of this information that we have any idea what Jesus taught, which is assumed to be the starting point of those doctrines. Teachings come second-hand. Frank W. Beer, in the introduction of his book The Earliest Records of Jesus, Abingdon Press, 1962, pp. 16-18, provides a glimpse of the problems faced, right from the beginning, by anybody researching in the field. In any serious study of the Gospels, we have always to keep in mind that Jesus himself left nothing in writing, and that the earliest records of his career which have come down to us were not put into writing until about 40 years after his death. All our knowledge of him is drawn from the deposit of a tradition which was transmitted for several decades by word of mouth. We are communication issues. 3 therefore obliged to raise the question of the relationship between the documents as we have them and the events and sayings which they report. For it must be realized that in a generation or more of oral transmission, sayings and stories do not remain unchanged. Once they have been committed to writing, they are to some degree stabilized, as it were, though even at this stage, we have to observe that Luke and Matthew do not shrink from altering the Markan record which they are both using. We cannot too lightly assume that what the earliest Christians thought worth preserving would be identical with what we ourselves would regard as most important, or even that it would reflect essentially what Jesus himself regarded as central to his message. It must be regarded as possible that Jesus was over the heads of his reporters, and we shall indeed find indications in the Gospels themselves that he from time to time manifested keen disappointment and even a certain impatience with the lack of understanding shown by his immediate disciples. It is not at all unlikely that the people who followed him may not have been capable of taking in all the range of his thought, and communicating it clearly to others. Beer's first point is that sayings and stories change as they are passed by word of mouth from person to person and generation to generation. To illustrate, do you remember the children's game that my group of friends called telephone? You may know it by another name. Everyone sits in a circle and one person whispers something into the ear of the next person. The message is passed from ear to ear until it comes back to the person who first whispered it. By the time it gets back to the original source, it is often totally different from the original message, causing much amazement and laughter. From the above short history of the Gospels and further reading, it seems clear that most, if not all, of the initial communication was oral, and that the Gospels were not written down until several years, perhaps as many as 40 or 50 years for the earliest, the Gospel of Mark after Jesus' departure. In that period of time, many human errors could have entered the transmission, and almost certainly did. 4. Development of the Christian doctrine. As an illustration of this, there are a great many variations among ancient manuscripts of the same material. Sometimes these variations are minor, but some are substantial. Thus, even committing the transmission to writing did not solve all issues. Beer's second point is that we do not know if the apostles always understood Jesus correctly and clearly transmitted his teachings. To expand on this, the process of attempting to communicate Jesus' teachings clearly to others did not stop with the initial writing of the Gospels. The revising and clarifying continues even to this day. On almost every page of any annotated English version of the New Testament, there are variant readings from ancient texts for one or more verses. In fact, in misquoting Jesus, The Story Behind Who Changed the Bible and Why, HarperCollins, 2005, p. 10, Bart D. Ehrman tells us that there are more variant readings among the ancient texts than there are total words in the New Testament. Most of these variations are inconsequential, but there are still many that are substantial and may affect Christian doctrine. Once the Gospels were committed to writing, they were still fragmented and difficult to come by. The following quote from Dr. George Lamsa demonstrates this fact. New Testament Origin, Aramaic Bible Society, Inc. No date given, p. 65. Note that at least one edition of this book was published in 1947, which gives a general indication of the time frame for this quote. Even today in Turkey and Persia, complete manuscripts of the scriptures are very rare. Scrolls containing portions of the Bible are found in the possession of various families. In some districts, one portion may be found in one village and the other completing portions perhaps in towns many miles away. When family ties are broken, the scrolls books are divided among the members. The student of the Bible must remember that in Jesus' day libraries, printing presses, and paper were unknown, and that sacred writings were available only to the priests, rich men, and rulers. This continued unavailability of written scripture would have caused oral communication to be an important factor in the developing doctrines and attitudes of Christianity, even communication issues, 5 after the Gospels were recorded. This fact may also help explain some of the many differences among manuscripts. In any case, there is a great variability among manuscripts of the Gospels, as will be discussed further. Authenticity never known with so much variation among manuscripts isn't the absolute authenticity of any text. Even the most venerable manuscripts, always in question. The Codex Vaticanus is a prime example of this. The facsimile reproductions edited by the Vatican City in 1965 include an accompanying editorial note with the following information. Several centuries after it was copied, ascribing it over all the letters except those he thought were a mistake. The different hands that corrected and annotated the manuscript over the centuries have not yet been definitely discerned. A certain number of corrections were undoubtedly made when the text was inked over. Sir Frederick Kenyon lists some of the important variations in the manuscripts of the Gospels: Our Bible and the Ancient Manuscripts, Harper and Brothers, 1958, pp. 48–49. The doxology of the Lord's Prayer is omitted in the oldest copies of Matt, vi. 13. Several copies omit Matt, XVI, 2, 3 altogether. A long additional passage is sometimes found after Matt, XX 28, the last 12 verses of St. Mark are omitted altogether by the two oldest copies of the original Greek. One very ancient authority inserts an additional incident after Luke vi. 4, while it alters the account of the institution of the Lord's Supper in Luke XXII, 19, 20, and omits altogether Peter's visit to the sepulchre in XXIV, 12, and several other details of the resurrection. The version of the Lord's Prayer in Luke 2–4 is much abbreviated in many copies. The incident of the bloody sweat is omitted in XXII, 43, 44, as also is the word from the cross, Father, forgive them, in 23. 34. The mention of the descent of an angel to cause the moving of the waters of Bethesda is entirely absent from the oldest copies of John version 4, and all the best authorities omit the incident of the woman taken in adultery in VII, 53 VIII. 11. Besides the larger discrepancies, such as these, there is scarcely a verse in which there is not some variation. 6. Development of the Christian doctrine of phrase in some copies. No one can say that these additions are omissions or alterations are matters of mere indifference. These variations are not matters of mere indifference because many Christian beliefs are based on a small part of the Bible. If those portions have been destroyed,